All right, today we are looking at the table saw, one of the most versatile tools in the shop. So our table saw has various parts to it. First off, we have the table. Important part, we have this large table work surface to work from and do our cutting. We also have a protective plastic piece here called a guard. That is the guard. Off to the side, this is going to support our piece of wood called the fence. It's kind of like a fence. If I slide the guard back a little bit here, we're going to see back here, this is called a splitter or riving knife. Oops, let me get you a little better angle. We have the splitter or riving knife that sits right behind our blade here. That's going to help us out as we're cutting and keep us safer. We also have to adjust our saw underneath it. We have a hand wheel on the front here that when I turn this one, it will raise or lower the blade. Off on a side, there's another hand wheel, and that changes the angle of the blade. So always the one on the front, adjust the height. The one on the side, sometimes it's on the right, sometimes it's on the left, depending on the table saw, we'll adjust the angle. Okay, so we want to keep our plastic guard over the blade, keep our fingers safe, and we always keep our board against the fence when we're ripping. That's what this saw's primary purpose is to rip, to cut the same direction as the grain is going, from end to end. Okay, so we can adjust it here as we go to start looking at making a cut. I can adjust our fence. We can loosen here and adjust the distance away, and then look at the ruler on here. The distance our fence is away, maybe I'll set this at 4 inches here, and then I can lock this down. So we want to adjust our fence where the distance away is. Then I want to look at the height of the blade, and I want to lower down the blade. I set the piece of wood that I'm going to cut through next to it, and I want to adjust the blade so that I'm about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch taller than the wood. That's going to allow it to cut more efficiently, and it's going to prevent us from having serious injury. Less blade is exposed to us. So I'm going to be making my rip cut here, cutting with the grain. I'm going to adjust now my guard over the blade so it's nice and safe. And then underneath the saw, I have my power switch down here to turn it on. So I'm going to turn it on, and then I'm going to use my hand, since this is a bigger piece, to push it up against the fence and let the fence guide it through, cutting it into a smaller strip. And here we go. Start it up. I stand off to the side a little so that I can push the drill, pushing it towards the fence and forward. And clear it all the way out before I shut it down. I don't want to try to grab that piece of wood while the blade's spinning at all. So there it is. There's my scrap cut off. Here is my board that has been cut to size. Now, if I'm cutting smaller things, I have a narrower board here. Maybe I want to cut this to a smaller size, so I'm going to loosen and adjust my fence. And then lock my fence down. If I'm going to cut it to a smaller size, I want to use something called a push stick. A push stick is used exactly for that reason. It is to push it, and it's kind of like a stick. And as you can see, this one's been used quite a bit. We use it for cutting small pieces, so that it cuts up this rather than our hand. We don't want our hand to get mangled from it, so we use this to cut the smaller strips. So again, my fence is good and everything. I'm going to turn this on, use my push stick now, and making sure that I'm pushing it still forward and to the right. So I'm keeping it up against the fence. I don't want it to drift away from the fence. So remember, cutting this direction with our grain, like I just did on the table saw, is our ripping. If I were to cut across the grain with a different type of saw, that would be cross-cutting. So as the blade cuts, it's actually consuming some of the material. It turns it into sawdust. Okay, so it doesn't make two, it doesn't just split it in the middle. So on the table saw, the material that we lose is 1/8 of an inch wide, and that is called our kerf. K-E-R-F, our blade kerf. That's the material that we lose as the board is cut up. Okay? Now, a lot of times when we're cross-cutting or using the bandsaw, we draw lines where we want to cut. With the table saw, we don't need to do that because we're setting the fence to the size we want. Then with the fence at the size we want, anytime we run the board through, it'll come out the same size. Now, that blade kerf, we're going to lose material. So if this were a 6-inch wide board, and I wanted to make 2 3-inch wide boards out of it, that's not going to happen. Because we are going to lose 1/8 of an inch of material. So we need to keep that in our consideration sometimes, that kerf, we're going to lose material. And if you have something that's 6 inches wide, you can't just split it into 2 inches. If this was 4 inches wide, you couldn't make 2 2-inch pieces. You could get close, but it would be a little small. Okay? Now, it's really important when we use the table saw that the edge of the board be nice and smooth. We don't want a board with a rough edge or uneven or one that's kind of cupped or angled at all, because that can make it very dangerous to cut through because we want to keep it tight up against the fence. If it is a rough board that doesn't have a smooth edge, we would have to use the jointer first. We would have to use the jointer first to smooth the edge before going to the table saw. Okay, so now if we are in the middle of a cut with a board, it's very important. If you let go of it, that board is going to go through what is called a kickback. It's when the piece of wood gets thrown back at a very high rate of speed. And if you're standing behind it, it's going to hit you. Okay, so we're trying to avoid kickbacks. We want to keep control of the piece of wood the whole time. We're controlling the piece that's between the fence and the blade. For the smaller cut, I was using the push stick. When it's a bigger cut, my hand can still fit through here with some safety in the guard over it, of course. Okay. Also, make sure, partially for the kickback, partially for our control, we want to stand to the side of the blade a little bit. Okay, I'm not standing right behind it here, but off to the left a little bit. That way, my geometry, I am forcing it forward and up against the fence. That's going to prevent kickbacks. This board has a pretty big knot in it, which is why I didn't cut through it. Because this knot is a very hard, dense area. If I try to cut through that, it may shatter and explode, and a little shrapnel can break off and fly at us. Which is why it's also really important we wear safety glasses when we're working with this. Now, if you're waiting to use the saw, the worst place you can wait is behind the saw. Because when you're behind it, if there's a kickback at all, that board's going to come back at a very high rate of speed and can hit you. If I'm cutting through here and I allow the board to wiggle away from the fence, it drifts away, creating a gap over here. That is going to greatly increase my chance of a kickback. because there's force going on that blade. It's not the straight cutting. This blade's spinning at us. It's going to want to kick that back at us. If I don't use the splitter or riving knife, if for some reason we take it out, which we really shouldn't, if we don't use it, that's preventing us from having kickbacks because it's preventing the board from turning over it. Okay, it's a physical barrier that allows our board not to turn over the blade. If we do not have that, the board can turn over our blade and then get accelerated backwards towards us. Okay, we never want to reach under this guard when we have it, in position. We never want to reach underneath there. That's a physical barrier to prevent us from getting to it. And we only use the push stick on pieces smaller than 4 inches. Because a piece that's bigger can cause it to actually drift away. So our hand is much better at controlling it.